Hello, everyone. Welcome to Secura webinar. My name is Yulia Plivaka. I'm an account manager certification at Secura, and I will be your host for this webinar. Today, we will cover a topic of certification for industrial products. I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Anna Prudnikova. She is a senior security certification specialist at Secura. This presentation will be followed by a Q&A session, and so feel free to leave your questions in the comments, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Anna, you're welcome to start the presentation.
Thank you, Yulia, and hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. So yes, my name is Anna, and I'm a senior certification specialist at Secura. So I'm leading evaluations based on various certification schemes, international, but also the Dutch schemes. And today we are going to speak about the industrial product certification. So I will start briefly to introduce you about Secura. So the Secura is a digital security expert company which has been on the market for over 20 years now. And our mission is providing insight into your digital security. And since January 2021, Secura is also a part of the Bureau Veritas company. So let's look at the agenda for today. We will start with an introduction to the topic of compliance and certification of the industrial product. Then we will look at the overview of applicable documents that we can use for compliance, and also how can we certify the product. Then we will look at three different standards, IECEE 62443-4-2, then ANSI UL 2900-2-2, and also at common criteria. And in the end, we will also take a look at the upcoming industrial certification component scheme. So let's start from the fact that the topic of compliance and certification for industrial components have multiple sides to it. So first of all, the technologies used in the industrial sector, they differ a lot from typical IT components, starting from the fact that different specific communication protocols such as Modbus are in place, and also different specific security controls. And moreover, even the focus of security is different. So if in classical IT environments, the main focus is to ensure confidentiality, for industrial environments, the goal is firstly to ensure availability and, of course, safety. So that is why the approach to assessing the security of industrial system and components shall be different. And over the recent years, multiple different guidelines, standards, and frameworks were developed. On top of that, different certification options are available to provide an assurance that industrial products are indeed secure. And moreover, the recent European Cybersecurity Act has made a dramatic change in the domain of cybersecurity evaluation because it specified a single framework which combines different evaluation schemes to harmonize cybersecurity evaluation across the European Union. And according to the Cybersecurity Act, multiple schemes shall be developed to support the Article 51 of the Cybersecurity Act, and those schemes will be in different areas of technology, and of course including the area of industrial components, which is our focus for today. So let's take a look at all the available documents that you can use for compliance. And as we can see, currently there exist a number of different guidelines, standards, and recommendations to secure industrial control systems and components. But, well, unfortunately for now, none of them have a status of internationally or at least European level recognized mandatory regulation. So here you see 8 different documents that we consider relevant for industrial components, and those can be potentially used to assess the security of industrial devices. If we take a look at the interesting one, of course, it's going to be IECEE 62443 series of standards. Then it's going to be NIST SP 882, which is specific for industrial components, the NIST SP, which is an American standard, then the ANSI UL 2900 series and specifically 2-2 standard. Then there will be some recommendations provided by ENISA, or also some Dutch checklist. Also, multiple countries have different standards they develop. And also an interesting one would be a NIST framework for improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. Sorry, what happened here? So the focus for today, sorry, basically to choose the most relevant ones, we will take a look at a number of parameters, which is a type of the document, which is a standard guideline checklist, the status, which is recommendatory or mandatory, also the zone of influence, which is worldwide or particular zone or country, also type of requirements, which is technical, administrative, scope, device or system related. And since the focus for today is certification, of course, we need to know if it's possible to certify based on this standard. So in the end, we will only focus on the standards for today's webinar. Then the parameters to take into consideration to assess compliance of the components are zone of influence, it would be worldwide or Europe, which is also type of requirements, which are technical. The scope will be device related because we are interested in the products, and also that the possibility of certification is available. And in the end, we choose two most specific ones for product manufacturers in industrial field. And those are the ones that presented on the screen right now. So specifically IECEE 62443-4-2, which is a security for industrial automation and control systems, part 4.2, technical requirements for industrial components. And the second one is ANSI UL 2900-2-2, which is a part of ANSI UL 2900 series, and it's called Outline of Investigation for Software Cybersecurity for Network Connectable Products, part 2-2, particular requirement for industrial control systems. So those two standards are specific for industrial components, but later on we will also look at another certification option, which is available for a broader set of IT products. So let's start with IECEE 62443-4-2. I think this is a standard that is most known right now in the industrial field of security. So it's, as I mentioned already, a series of standards, and 4-2 is specific for the components. There are multiple certification schemes available based on the standard, and we will take a look at one of the examples later. Then it's specific for only components. There is another standard, which is 3-3, which focuses on systems, but they're quite, let's say, similar. And the focus of the whole standard is basically on validation testing. So if you take a look at the requirements presented in the standard, there are 7 categories of basic requirements, and those are defined as functional requirements. And requirements include both technical and procedural process aspects related to the product and scope. And also the standard specifies 4 different defined security levels, and also 3 different types of security levels. I'm not going to go into details because it might be a bit confusing, but we will define security levels, also called SL. And if we speak about the timelines, we can consider around 20 days of evaluation for a medium complexity product for security level 1. And here we speak about security level 1 because currently majority of the certified devices are actually certified for security level 1. Only a few are certified for security level 2, and none of the devices are certified for higher levels right now. So one of the examples of certification schemes, as I mentioned, there are multiple ones, is the one known in Europe is IECEE certification, and it's operated by IECEE and included in its scope the multiple international IECEE standards. And recently, under the scope of the scheme, there were added several parts of the cybersecurity related IECEE 62443 standards. And based on the standards, the system and components from various domains can be evaluated and certified, increasing their market value and recognition. So the scope includes currently the standard 2-4, which is a certification for product integrators and service providers. then 3-3, which is certification for system security capabilities, then 4-1, which is certification for product manufacturers development processes, and 4-2, which is certification for component security capabilities. And as I already mentioned, that the standard 3.3-3 and 4-2 are pretty much similar. Well, the scope for products actually include an industrial product, system, solution, or development side of the processes. So we already looked at what standards represent those. An important thing here also to mention that whenever you want to certify the product based on the 4-2 standard, you need to first certify the development process, which is based on the 4-. So this is something really important to keep in mind, because it will add, if you don't have this certification right now in place, you need to start with that one before you can start certifying the products. Well, there are multiple stakeholders involved in the process. Of course, it's always the customer who wants to certify the products. This is a licensed test laboratory, and well, Secura is one of those, and also certification body who is capable of issuing the certificates. In our case, it could be the Bureau Veritas. Well, in general, the aim of the IECEE scheme is to allow evaluation to be performed as much as possible based on documentation provided by the sponsor. And this is also from a practical point of view, because industrial systems, they often can be highly complex, which makes practical testing in a lab not really feasible. And also the audits on location and witnessing of testing can be used to raise confidence in the evaluation result. So now let's move to the second standard, which is specifically focusing on industrial component certification, and this is ANSI UL 2902-2, which is a part of ANSI UL 2900 series of standards. So you can also certify the specific components for industrial components based on this standard. There exist multiple private certification schemes based on the standard, because recently it became an internationally recognized standard, and now you see this ANSI part to it. So, for example, Bureau Veritas can also do the certification based on this scheme. The focus here will be on software part of the industrial components, and the difference between the IECEE 62443, the fact that the validation testing will be powered by penetration testing and source code review. So, well, now let's take a look at the requirements presented in the standard. So there are four main categories of the requirements. Those are risk controls, risk management, vulnerabilities and exploits, and software weaknesses analysis. The focus of the requirements on technical requirements and penetration testing, but it also should be always considered together with another standard, which is, let's say, the main one of the series, which is 1-1, which specifies the general requirements for network connectable devices. There are no levels. So comparing again to IECEE 62443, which introduces 4 different levels, ANSI UL 2900 does not introduce any levels. So there is always a single level of certification. So you either comply to the standard or not. And if you think about the effort, there is an extra effort to certify the product based on this standard, due to the fact that you need to perform the pen testing and do the source code review. And later on, we are going to take a look at the table, which contains the comparison between different standards, and then we will take a look at the effort. So basically, the scope of the certification is all the series of standards of ANSI UL 2900. So they and if we speak about the industrial components, for us, it's interesting to take a look at the 1-1, which is about the general products, and 2-2, which is specific for industrial components. And as I mentioned before, those two should be considered together. And well, in general, the whole idea of certifying the products based on the UL 2900 series is to minimize risk by creating the standardized testable criteria to assess the software vulnerabilities and weaknesses in embedded product and system. So here we see that the focus is on the software part of the product, not the hardware part. And this actually, in the end, also helps to reduce the exploitation and of those vulnerabilities, and also address the known malware, also to enhance the security controls and expand the security awareness. So scope, as I mentioned, the software vulnerabilities and weaknesses in embedded products and systems. So again, something to keep in mind, that the focus is on software part. The involved stakeholders are pretty much similar to the previous scheme. There would be customers who would like to certify their product. There will be evaluation laboratories, and there will be a certification body who can issue a certificate. And as I can mention in this case, it could be Bureau Veritas. The process basically is documentation review powered by functional and penetration testing. So again, there is a difference between this scheme and IECE 62443 because the focus is also on the penetration testing part. So another important standard that, let's say, you can always consider to certify any type of IT product is common criteria. So the common criteria actually allows you to certify any type of IT product. It also could be a part of the product or multiple products together. It includes the documentation review, validation testing, and penetration testing on top of that. So it's also quite a big evaluation project. And I will not go into too many details about this because we had a previous webinar focused on common criteria. And if you're interested, you can find the recording on our website. And if you don't know how to find it, you can always contact me or Yulia, and we can navigate you towards this. So if we take a look at the whole common criteria, basically there are three main parts of common criteria. So the part one includes the introduction and general model. Part two includes the security functional components. Well, basically component is a requirement. And part three is a security assured components, which is basically, again, a requirement. And on top of that, there is also a separate document which should be considered together with common criteria. And this is a common evaluation methodology, which is used always to evaluate the product. So again, as I mentioned, there are two types of requirements, which are functional and assurance requirement presented in different parts of the common criteria. And there are 7 assurance levels available for certification. And well, basically selecting the desired evaluation level is based on the preference of the manufacturer. Well, typically the embedded products, including industrial components and system, are suited for lower level evaluation. So from level 1 to level 3. And this is due to the fact that typical security capabilities embedded into such products, as well as the evaluation effort, because the higher you go with the evaluation, the more effort you need to spend to certify the product. And well, basically all those seven levels of assurance, they depend on the assurance level that the security is in place, and it goes higher the assurance, higher the level. And also, of course, it increases the effort, and this effort is based upon the depth of evaluation, coverage of evaluation, and rigor of evaluation. So if you take a look at the scope for common criteria, well, that could be any type of IT product. It also could be a part of the product or multiple product. There's slightly different terminology for involved stakeholders, but they're, well, basically the same. So there is a sponsor, which is again a customer. There is a national certification scheme. There is one, for example, in the Netherlands, which is called NSKIP. And there is also a IT security evaluation facility, which is basically an evaluation lab, which Secura is. Well, if we take a look at the process of evaluation, it's a bit different from the previous schemes that we discussed, because the list of activities will depend on the chosen level of assurance. well, it will always include at least the documentation review and functional testing, but with higher levels, you will also add on top the penetration testing, and starting from level 4, you will also include the source code review. And this is, I guess, well, a really important, like a bit of a time to look through that. So how to choose the best option for your product. So we considered several characteristics, and also we took a look at the 3 standards that we discussed previously. And let's start from the scope. So as I mentioned, for IECEE certification, it's specific for industrial components, which is based on the 4-2 standard. If we take a look at ANSI UL 2900 2-2, again, this is industrial components specifically, but focus is on software part of those components. And for common criteria certification, it's generic for any type of IT product. Then if you take a look at the recognition, well, IECEE, it's an international recognition, but I guess it is more known a bit in Europe. If you take a look at ANSI UL 2900 certification, it is again international, but more known in America. And the common criteria certification is definitely known all over the world. Then the value of certificate. Well, again, as I mentioned, IECE 62443 series of standards is now really known in the world of industrial cybersecurity. So, of course, if you certified your product based on that one, it will give you a good recognition on the market. If we take a look at the ANSI UL 2900, it's good because it's, again, specific for industrial components, probably a bit less known in Europe, but really widely known in USA. So depending on the market on which you want to focus, I would recommend going, if you want to be more recognized in USA, well, probably better to go to ANSI UL 2900. If you want to be known more in Europe, well, in this case, we would recommend to go to IECE 62443 certification. And of course, if you want to have a really high international recognition and the prestigious certification, because of the fact that the approach is so complex and everybody know about that, then you can aim at the common criteria certification. Then the flexibility of the process. Well, let's say the IECE certification quite flexible, just because of the fact that well, most of it can be done by documentation review. So even the let's say the test results can be provided by the customer, and in this case, the evaluation laboratory will just take a look at those tests and will decide whether or not to repeat some of those tests. And then the rest of the 2 schemes are way more strict. So everything should be done specifically by the test laboratory, especially the common criteria, because the common criteria really involves the third party in the process, which is a national scheme. Well, right now it's of course only the national scheme, but there's a bit of the European common criteria based scheme is coming, so the whole process will slightly change, but right now it's still the same. So you have this third party which will control your process, so you cannot deviate anyhow from the scheme. And then the required effort, which is interesting. So as we already mentioned, for IECE certification for the medium complexity component security level 1, we consider 20-25 days. But we also need to keep in mind that the additional certification product development processes is required based on the 4-1 standard. And I would say that will add on top 20-25 days. So you need to take that into account. Then if you take a look at the ANSI UL 2900 certification, well, I would say it's 40-50 days for medial complexity component. And as we discussed, there are no levels. So you can certify based on the standard without choosing a level. And if we take a look at the common criteria, there will be 40-60 days expected for a level 2 evaluation, which, as I mentioned, is a good level to certify the industrial component. And while the required involvement during the whole evaluation process, well, for IECE certification will be minimum Again, preparation is required, of course, because you need to have the proper documentation and also make the testing yourself. Again, for ANSI UL 2900, during the evaluation, it's minimum, but preparation is required, and common criteria is really high communication between the customer, the scheme, and the evaluation lab is required. So that's also something to keep in mind, depending on how much time you're ready to invest during the evaluation and before. And well, let's use the rest of the time to speak about the upcoming scheme. So basically, currently, the recommendation for the implementation of the Industrial Automation and Control System Components Cybersecurity Certification Scheme, which is ICCS, has been issued. So it's not yet a scheme, but it's just a recommendation for that scheme. So you can also find that already available on the NIST website. And it was produced with a closed and consistent reference and relevance to the European Cybersecurity Act, as I mentioned before. As for the proposed timeline, so far the request for the scheme was not made by IECEE, but it is expected for this year. And well, this means that hopefully we can have the first draft of the scheme somewhere next year. So let's take a look at the scope of the upcoming scheme. Well, what the scheme defined as a component? Well, it's a device or piece of software or hardware that belongs to or is developed by a manufacturer, that has a reference and or branding name, basically a product number, for example, and the instances of which may be assigned with a serial number so as to identify each specific install built by the manufacturer. So here we see it's a software or hardware which is basically produced by a manufacturer. So here we can take a look at the evaluation activities, and also another important thing here to see, there are 3 assurance levels based on the Cybersecurity Act, which are called basic, substantial, and high. And then depending on the level you want to achieve for your certification, the evaluation activities will also vary. So for the basic one, it will be component cybersecurity profile evaluation, then the document review on the basic level, and then installation configuration and decomposition and procedures review. For the level substantial, on top of the activities that I mentioned for the basic level, there will be some additional activities, which is a security functional testing and vulnerability analysis on a substantial level. And again, if we move to a high level, there will be more activities. So again, the previously mentioned one. Then there will be development process audit. The vulnerability analysis will be at a high level. There will be also a penetration testing involved, and the cryptographic assessment if there are any cryptographic algorithms in place, of course. So what is the proposed methodology? Because we discussed that previous schemes already have the methodologies in place. So what is the proposed methodology for the upcoming scheme? Well, first of all, the certification scheme has to rely on the standards that specify the evaluation methodology to assess if a component meets a specific criteria requirement. And there is no single standard that for now adequately covers the whole set of evaluation activities defined by the scheme, but it does include the references to applicable standards. And actually, there is a specific reason for that there is no defined standard, because it will allow the approach for certification to be more flexible. So how we can fit discussed previous schemes into the upcoming scheme? So first of all, it is important to mention that the proposed scheme was developed by a dedicated work group, which included multiple people from different companies and industries. And in the conclusion, they created the set of requirements based on the different standards. And this set of requirements can also serve as a base for the future protection profiles. But there is still more work needed on finalizing this, and this will be done in the next phase when NIST actually asks for this scheme. However, the proposed basic industrial component cybersecurity requirements catalog take as a basis IECEE 62443 4-2 standards, which basically means that by complying with IECE 62443-4-2 standard, you're already complying to most of the requirements proposed by the scheme. And this could be a good starting point. And why do we think that it basically takes IECE 62443-4-2 standard? Because you can see here, for example, the requirement enhancement tab, which is really specific to this standard. So how the IECE 62443 standard? Well, the upcoming scheme, which is in a file called recommendation, there is a section A2, which is basically a mapping between Cybersecurity Act Article 51 and existing evaluation approaches. It gives a detailed mapping of individual requirements of Cybersecurity Act to IECE 62443-4-2. And here it actually demonstrates that all relevant requirements can be used using this evaluation approach. And here also on the screen, we can see an example of mapping. So another interesting observation that for the high level of assurance, and we saw that in the previous slide, there is an additional class of evaluation activities, which is called development process audit. And since the upcoming ICCS scheme does not mandate the use of any specific standard, the usage of IECE 62443-4-1, which is a secure product development lifecycle requirements, is a good solution to address the process requirements as well. Then how can we fit the ANSI UL 2900-2-2 approach? Well, I think the good start would be to use this as actually the basic evaluation approach. And here we can take a look at the examples of some evaluation activities mapping from the upcoming scheme to UL 2900-2-2. So for example, we can see that the ICCS scheme has a documentation review. Well, then if you take a look at UL 2900-2-2, there is also documentation of product design, and product use. Then, of course, there is a vulnerability analysis in ICCS document, and there is vulnerabilities and exploits also in the UL 2900-2-2, and so on. So, well, the question is how to prepare for the upcoming scheme. Well, unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. The answer will be to combine both approaches, and the combination of both from those will make you prepare based on the schemes. And I also would like to mention, well, this is it for today, actually webinar. So we will move now to a Q&A session. So make sure you have the questions ready. And I also would like to mention that we will have in 1 week from today another upcoming webinar, which will also focus on product certification, but specific for IoT devices. So please register now and make sure that you attend. And now, yes, let's move to Q&A. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anna, for a nice presentation. We have a couple of questions. Let me see. The first question is, currently there is another proposed European certification scheme based on common criteria, IECEE. What is the difference in this case between IECEE and the proposed one for industrial components?
Okay, yeah, well, thanks for the question. Well, first of all, let's say, as I already mentioned, that in general, the common criteria scheme really focuses more on generic IT products. And in general, I would say it is considered a bit more, well, scary because it's way more, let's say, big and also complex than the proposed scheme for the industrial components. So of course, because they were developed, let's say, by the same with the same mindset, they're similar, but at the same time, let's say, the focus of cybersecurity will be different. And again, we discussed that already, that for IT products, we always focus more on confidentiality of information, and for the industrial products, more on availability and safety. So yeah, basically, yeah, so the reply is yes, they're similar, but at the same time, there was a different focus. So depending on what you want to achieve.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question. You mentioned two standards related to industrial products that can be used as a starting point for compliance for the proposed scheme. can you elaborate a bit more? Why did you choose to focus on those two?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Well, basically, let's say both of those standards are really focus on the industrial components, while some of the rest of the standards, what we also took into consideration, they either focus more on IT components in general, or they're specifically focused on America, for example, as New York SIP is. So the goal was to find, let's say, the standard which will combine really good approach for the industrial components. And I think that in this case, we can consider IECE 62.4.3/4-2 and also the UL 2900 as the best ones. And also because I would say here, because you can certify based on those products. And in this case, certification will really give you assurance that security in place, and it's also a good, let's say, marketing approach to sell your products.
Yeah, thank you for the answer. That was all the questions for today. And thanks again, Anna, for a really nice presentation. And we will close it for today. Thanks everyone for attending, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you. Yeah, if you have any more questions, you can always contact me or Julia.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.